The Eastern Conference hasn't been a huge mystery since the day LeBron James decided to put on a Miami Heat jersey. On that day, James decided he was done carrying franchises on his back, because like 99% of the superstars who attempted that before him, he was failing at it in terms of trying to win a championship. Joining two of the top players in his conference and in the NBA, the Heat became an instant favorite to not only come out of the East, but to also win multiple championships for years to come. Even though in two of those seasons he came dangerously close to not getting out of the East, throughout those seasons they were still the heavy favorites to come out in the end, and they always did. It's now been 3 seasons since he decided to rejoin Cleveland, and with the help of Love and Irving, it's largely been the same story as far as expectations for the East. However, with the Cavs now playing one of the worst defenses by any contending repeat champion in recent memory, many are starting to question if this is the year someone strips him of the Eastern Conference title, and the possibility of that is what we'll be looking at today when we complete the playoff bracket started in my Western Conference video. What's up NBA fans, Dom2K on the mic, and I'll be honest right from the jump, I'm likely going to get a significant amount of these predictions wrong as compared to my West video. The West was relatively easy to plan for, but in the East there's this large gray area that doesn't exist for the West. Here, aside from the Cavs, a lot of these teams don't have significant advantages over one another, and specifically for the Boston Celtics, this is the first time I've seen a first seed that could possibly be beaten in a series by almost any other team from 2 to 8, and that's where we'll start. When the dust settled and the NBA wrapped up last night, the Chicago Bulls were left standing in the 8th seed after all the struggle they'd been through. The horrible basketball, Dwayne Wade being pronounced out for the season with an elbow injury, the Rondo situation, many of us just wrote the Bulls off for the year. But then Jimmy Butler started playing some of the best basketball in the NBA, which I feel kinda went unnoticed. For the last month of the season, Butler averaged 24 points, 6.8 assists, 6.1 rebounds on 48.5% field goal percent shooting. And that right there is what scares me about the Bulls in the series against Boston. While it's true the Bulls are a 500 team, they're still very good defensively, ranking 6th in the league, but as usual, their offense as a whole is lacking. Even with that, I think if you pay attention to what Wade did in the playoffs last year and how Paul George came within minutes of beating the Raptors by himself, the important thing is that the playoffs are made for superstar players. And when you have these stars that are two-way players like Jimmy Butler, they can absolutely take over a game, and in some cases, they can negate the difference between how good the two teams are. If you don't believe me, just refer to 2015 when LeBron gave the Warriors a run for their money almost single-handedly. Now, I'm not saying Jimmy Butler is LeBron James, but I draw that comparison to show the type of influence a star player can have on a series. While the Celtics do have Isaiah Thomas, who even had his name flirting around with the MVP race, he's not a two-way player, and his overall effect on the game can sometimes be limited to just explosive scoring. On top of that, the season series has been very close with both teams splitting their matchups and only one blowout score going to the Celtics. Now, I don't know how good Dwayne Wade is anymore. He's coming back from injury, he's getting older, and his numbers are down as Jimmy Butler evolves. However, I want to remind you, it was only a year ago where Wade almost propelled the Heat past Toronto with no other superstar help. He rises to the occasion in the playoffs, and I fully expect the combination of him and Butler to be a nightmare for the Celtics to deal with in a playoff series. All that being said, Boston has still been the better team the whole year, and they've got home court advantage. In a way, they remind me a lot of the Spurs style of play. The ball moves around a lot, they've got a primary scorer, but overall every player on the team plays to their role, and that might make the difference in this series if it's executed correctly. Just like last season when George or Wade couldn't do it all against the Raptors, I'm not sure if Butler will be able to carry Chicago past the Celtics, so I've got Boston in 7. But let me be very clear that this is the gray area I was talking about earlier in the video. If Butler is on and Wade still has the gear he can turn on for the playoffs, that would certainly be enough to sway the tide in Chicago's favor. So if there was ever an upset in this playoffs, I'd expect it to come from this series. That brings us to the 2-7 matchup with the defending champion Cavs facing off against Paul George and the Pacers. I've gotta say, I was praying for this matchup just to get to see George and LeBron duel again, and especially after George's broken leg, I'm really proud to say that we've got our 4th George James matchup in 6 postseasons. First off, we can go ahead and get their regular season matchups out of the way. As you'd expect, the Cavs owned this series 3-1, and the only game the Pacers won was when LeBron sat out. If you missed out on their last matchup, it was amazing. LeBron and George matched each other shot for shot, but the Cavs were able to pull it off in a double OT thriller. For the most part, the Pacers sorely underachieved this season. With the development of Miles Turner and other additions to the roster like Jeff Teague, many people thought the Pacers would be contenders for the conference finals, yet they just barely made the playoffs, and they're gonna pay for it by facing the defending champions early in the first round. Sure, the Cavaliers have been having problems of their own, but the fact that they just beat Indiana about a week ago playing terrible defense makes me me think they'll be able to handle them in the playoffs relatively easily. We all know LeBron saves his best for the postseason, and although I don't think his playoff mode can save the team's broken defense, I think it can do enough for the team that they'll be able to dispatch this Pacers roster in no more than 5 games. The 3-6 matchup features the Bucks and Raptors, and this makes me happy mainly because I'm ready to see what the Greek Freak can do on the main stage. The last time the Bucks made the playoffs, Giannis was only a sophomore in the league who hadn't even gotten close to reaching his potential. 2 seasons later, he's evolved into a fully blown all-star, and he's become only one of 5 players in league history to lead their team in all 5 major statistical categories. After LeBron is done dominating the East, I really think he's probably got next. But for the moment, they're matched against a team that's just all around better than they are on both offense and defense. Toronto owns the season series 3-1, one of those losses coming while Kyle Lowry was still out dealing with the wrist injury. On top of that, 2 of those games were blowouts, one of which DeMar DeRozan didn't even play in, and they still won. So while I'm very high on the Bucks' future potential, especially when Thon Maker reaches his potential next to Giannis, for the moment I don't believe a team like the Bucks could beat them in a series. Toronto's main problem in the playoffs comes against a team that has a solidified superstar on it, and while Giannis is only like 1 step under that at the moment, I don't think he's at the stage where he's going to take over a series like Wade and George did last year, so I'm going to go Raptors in 5 here. Finally, this brings us to my easiest decision in the Eastern Conference. Well, kind of. I don't know if it's my easiest, but it's the Hawks and Wizards, and this is a rematch from the 2015 semifinals, which kind of doesn't matter anymore because the roster is totally different for Atlanta, but it happened. Washington seems like they finally have come along after all the years of injuries and disappointment, and now they're where I expected them to be in 2016. I spent a long time feeling like if Wall hadn't messed up his hand in 2015, they would have been in the Eastern Conference Finals against the Cavaliers. Nevertheless, nothing serious is wrong with him coming into the playoffs, and I expect to see him and Beal lead the team past Atlanta. Now, I will admit, looking at the regular season matchups, you can see the Hawks aren't a terrible matchup for them. Although the Wizards won 3 of the 4 matchups, 2 of those losses were very close games. However, as I mentioned in the Bulls series, the playoffs are for superstars, and John Wall has emerged as possibly the Eastern Conference's best point guard this season. Oh, and the Hawks have another problem. While their defense is very good, they're the 27th ranked team in the league as far as offensive rating. Meanwhile, the Wizards are once again the top offense in the league. While it's true defense wins championships, you've got to be able to put points on the board as well. It's weird though, because it's worth noting that the Wizards defense could be considered average or even flat out bad, so these teams are opposites of some sort. Either way, I'm gonna go with the Wizards in 6 this time. If the Celtics do get past the Bulls, that would spawn one of the only NBA matchups you could consider a rivalry outside of the Warriors and Cavaliers. The Wizards and Celtics would be fun to see for many reasons, the main one being these guys don't like each other at all, and that's always fun. For who would win the series? Man, how do you choose? It's a pretty even matchup. The 2 split their regular season games, and it's worth noting that the Wizards blew Boston out twice, meanwhile Boston's wins were relatively narrow. Honestly, it'd be difficult to find a more even series than this, but I think I know which way I'm leaning. See, the Wizards don't have the same issue as the Bulls to me. For them, Wade is recovering from an injury and his age has gotten to him, so whether or not the Bulls beat Boston to me is dependent on if he can show up with a great performance to match what Jimmy Butler is going to do. However, for the Wizards, I think it's a safe bet that Wall and Beal are going to light it up, and as good as the Celtics are, this is the reason us Celtics fans were pleading with Danny Ainge to make a trade at the deadline. They need a second dependable star next to Isaiah Thomas for the postseason. Thomas is averaging almost 30 points a game this year, but the next highest scorer next to him is Avery Bradley at 16 points a game. I understand that Boston relies on team ball, but in the playoffs, this matters. If you're not the San Antonio Spurs, you need at least 2 guys that can and do play at a star level at all times. And with Wall and Beal both posting career highs, along with the fact that they've got a good supporting cast to go with it, I'd have to give them this series in 7 games. If anything, this should show you I have no bias because Boston is my team, but I'll happily admit that they're the most vulnerable 1 seed I've seen in a long time. I'm not comfortable with betting on them for a deep run until they get that second star. On the other side of the bracket, we get an early rematch of last year's Eastern Conference Finals. I think it came as a surprise to most of us that it took Cleveland 6 games to close them out simply because they were so dominant in the first 2 games, and the last 2 games they won, it just sort of seemed like that should have been a sweep. Either way, we're going to see it again, and this time DeMar DeRozan has much improved. My biggest problem with the Raptors every year leading up to this one was that I didn't see them as having a legitimate superstar, mostly because they'd be okay in the regular season and then play subpar ball in the postseason. Of course, they still have to prove that they can carry this into the postseason because they just barely got into the conference finals last season, but if DeRozan can drag his regular season play into the playoffs, they might stand a better chance. However, as always, this still is not a good matchup for Toronto. After losing to the Cavs last year, they only beat them one time this season, just actually last night because Cleveland rested everybody. Albeit the 3 losses were close, they still have not proved that they're good enough to take Cleveland in the series. Just based on what we've seen since the playoffs last year, I'm still comfortable picking the Cavs to win this in 6 games. I say 6 again because A, that's what it took last year, and B, Cleveland has some clear defensive issues that'll definitely allow the Raptors to turn one of these close losses into a win. That brings us to the Eastern Conference Finals matchup we should have gotten back in 2015 like I mentioned earlier, and it's honestly the matchup I'm hoping for. In a previous video, I said that if anyone were to beat the Cavs in the Eastern Conference series, it'd have to be the Wizards, and I had a good reason. John Wall is lightning fast, and so is the Wizards' offense at times. With the Cavs being a terrible defensive team and the Wizards being a great offensive team, I expect them to be able to exploit many holes in the defense just the way they did in the last matchup. As you can see in 3 regular season matchups, Washington only got 1, but I want to remind you that they were only about a second away from taking the second matchup. That took a miracle shot for the Cavaliers to win. I also find it interesting that John Wall is one of the only point guards in the East I don't think Kyrie would get the best of in the series. It's not like anyone can really guard Kyrie, but Kyrie really can't guard John Wall either, so that's going to be a very back and forth matchup. Even with all these great things I have to say about the Wizards, I'm sorry, but after watching LeBron-led teams dominate the Eastern Conference for 6 straight years, I'm really going to have to see it with my own eyes before I believe they can be eliminated before the finals. Or another team is that, that has a lot of stars on it is going to have to pop up in the East. It's just going to have to take something like that. As trash as Cleveland has played down the stretch this season, they were still eligible to get the first seed all the way up until the last day, and had they have not rested so much, they probably would have gotten it, so that should tell you something about the East. The minimal effort they had to put in to be a second seed kinda tells me that they probably won't be beaten in the East, and my other issue comes with the fact that there is no East team with enough firepower to beat them in a series. Let's try not to forget that even with this weak defense, the playoff form of this offense can do well enough to bridge the gap in the East. In other words, what they'll lose against an East team and letting them score, they'll more than make up for with the offensive onslaught we've seen they're capable of. I think the Wizards need to mature into a big 3 before beating Cleveland. When John Wall, Bradley Beal, and specifically Otto Porter get just a little bit better, I think they have a real shot, but in the series, I'm gonna have to go Cavs in 6. This brings us to part 3 of the Warriors and Cavaliers battle in the NBA Finals, and let's keep our fingers crossed that we can finally see this matchup healthy. Over the last 2 years, I've seen something that many fans refuse to accept. We've simply never seen the best version of a Cavaliers and Warriors series for the full length of it. Neither roster has been healthier in the 2 finals, significant and unfortunate events have altered the outcomes of both series, and here we are hoping that if a part 3 does happen, that everyone can just stay on the damn court for 1 series at least. So coming into this season, the narrative was that if LeBron somehow beat a Golden State team with Kevin Durant on it, you could seriously start to consider him for the greatest of all time, and that's for a very good reason. If, and I mean if, the Cavaliers beat this team healthy, imagine adding this to the list of teams LeBron has beaten in the finals. Between the Spurs, Thunder, 73-9 Warriors, and Kevin Durant Warriors, it's starting to get pretty hard to keep denying him that GOAT title for much longer. But is there a realistic chance of that happening? Well, my short answer is no. First of all, we all watched the 2 regular season matchups. In the first game, Cleveland won after a last-ditch effort to come back, and they were successful, but because of what happened next, it's still worth noting that it took everything they had to come back and win that game by a point. In the second matchup, we all know what happened there. The Warriors ran Cleveland all the way out of the building. It wasn't really close at any point. Now, many people are going to start typing and tell me that the Warriors blew them out on Martin Luther King Day last season and still lost the finals, to which I respond, A, we know the circumstances it took for that final series to even be competitive, whether you choose to accept them or not, and B, this is both a different Warriors and Cavs team. The Warriors got better by adding a second ball handling scorer that's also an MVP candidate, so now when Curry's long range bombs aren't dropping anymore, they've got another guy who can create his own shot, which is something that that probably would have been helpful in the last minutes of Game 7. To go with that, Cleveland's defense is way too poor to contend with Golden State as it stands today. And as I've stated before, I don't think there's a playoff mode for defense. You can play with more energy and intensity, but defensive chemistry is something that's a work in progress. And unless they somehow figure that out during the playoffs, the Warriors are going to have a field day in the finals. Remember, I said in the East that what the Cavs don't have on defense can be covered for by their explosive offense. The problem in the series with the Warriors is that they have just as much, if not more, offensive firepower, and on top of that, they play championship defense. So guys, you can be mad at me all you want for this, but I've already showed you I'm not biased for any reason by knocking my own team out in the second round. If the Golden State Warriors Cavaliers rematch happens, I'm picking the Warriors in 5 games. The only reason I'm giving Cleveland a game is because I know how ridiculous LeBron James can be when he's using 100% of his ability, so I fully believe they can get a game from the Warriors, but a series? Alright, check this out. Last season's finals were not competitive at any point before that suspension to injury hit. Games 1 and 2 looked like someone playing on rookie, and Game 4 ended up being a double-digit win as well. I fully admit it's Draymond Green's fault for getting suspended, and it should have happened to him in the OKC series if we're being honest, but when Bogut messed up his knee, you could literally see at the point where the series changed. The score was close up until he went out, and then LeBron James just had a field day inside. Now, I'm not making excuses for Golden State because they had their chances in Game 7 to win it all, but I'm just bringing it up to show you that when healthy, it wasn't a close series last year, and it really shouldn't be this year. There's just no scenario in which a team playing 22nd ranked defense can expect to beat the Warriors 4 times in a series. Those open threes Cleveland has made a habit of giving up off rotations, those are going to be fatal in a series against the Warriors. But if something changes and Cleveland magically pulls elite championship defense out of their hat anytime in the next 50 days, I've got no problem admitting I was wrong. I just don't think it can happen. And there you have it. Here's my complete bracket for the 2017 NBA playoffs. I feel very comfortable with the Western Conference predictions because it's so top heavy, but in the East, as I've already said, there's a lot of gray areas, specifically with the Celtics. Just looking at it, I think the only team I would definitively pick the Celtics to beat in a series would probably be the Bucks and maybe the Pacers. Everyone else is definitely capable of beating Boston. And I say that to show you I have zero bias in my blood. In a perfect world for me, the Celtics would beat the Cavs in the Eastern Conference Finals and at least make the NBA Finals again, but I'm in full agreement with the Celtics owner. I don't think they're the team to beat in the East, even with the first seed. Anyways, what do you guys think? I already know plenty of you disagree with my finals assessment, and it's funny because I've been accused of riding the Warriors because I'm stating the obvious about the gap that stands between them and the rest of the NBA, but it's whatever, I guess. Anyways, I'd love to see what you guys think about the East. Who do you think is going to win the championship? And if you think this is the year LeBron finally doesn't run the East anymore, I definitely want to know that too. So like, comment, and subscribe if you enjoyed. Hit the bell next to my name if you want notifications on my videos. I'm Dom2K, and I'll see you guys on the next one. Thanks for watching.